call the council workshop to order. All right, I'm going to call to order the council workshop for Tuesday, February 10th at 7 o'clock. Council, this has been an agenda circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda is presented. Hearing none, will someone move its adoption? Moved by Councillor Murray, seconder on the matter.
Second.
Second by Councillor Ma. You can't second.
I know, I'm just trying to move things, but I don't know why it takes everybody so long.
Call the question, all in favor. Contrary minded, motion is carried. All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, second.
One big item for discussion tonight, and we're going to implement a tax on any slide presentation over 15 slides. This one's 62 slides.
Don't panic, it's in pieces. We may not get through it all tonight. We have a second night, but we might get through it all depending on the robustness of the discussion. And so just don't panic.
We should
So
wager.
let's check in, Tamsin. What run of show, how would you like this to go? You want to do about 10 slides, have a break, about 20
We
slides,
got
have a break?
it set up, and I think Yan actually will take us through this in just a moment, but essentially it is broken into sections.
I see the questions page at 19th slide, so if very small clarifying questions along the way, if you don't understand a term that was used or something, that's all cool. Otherwise, we're going to wait till the breaks that are in the slide deck to do Q&A. Okay? Okay.
All right.
But your intent is to carry forward this discussion to another night as well, so don't get stressed. Ask your question if you need to ask your question. Okay. That's it. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're excited to talk about zoning bylaw rewrite with you tonight. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to present to you our progress to date. I know it feels like a continuation of the discussion we just had, but this is a distinct project that Council's initiation. So I just want to do a brief project intro and introduce the team tonight, and then go over the structure of the agenda, our presentation. So the zoning bylaw is a fundamental piece of a regulatory tool to help us manage land use in our community. We also know that is a key implementation mechanism of the OCP. So the OCP lays out a 30-year vision of where our community like to go. And underpinning that is the zoning bylaw. So our zoning bylaw is 60 years old. So it's time for the zoning bylaw itself to get an update. And the intent is to increase the user friendliness, to modernize language and the format, and to streamline regulation and to really provide that clarity that the staff and the applicant need. We know good regulation is a cornerstone to support the smooth development approval process. So just in terms of the scope, I just want to say that by and large, this is a technical and professional undertaking. But whenever appropriate, we are considering implementation of the existing council policies and priorities. And as you will see tonight, we're going to be talking about employment-related zones. Work began in earnest in fall 2024 at council's initiation. And here we are at the beginning of 2026. We have a full draft of bylaw ready for review, discussion, and refinement. The work is led by staff team, Tamsin Gabi in the lead. We have a core staff team, about 3 to 5 people, some dedicated full-time, some part-time. And we're very lucky to be supported by a good consultant team. And tonight in the room is, next slide, please. I wanted to introduce the team is Colton Kurzop from McElhaney as our lead consultant. We have John Taraki, transportation engineer. And then we also, from time to time, engage a wide range of subject matter expert. And tonight with us is Adam Matheson from BNA Studios, who have advised us on commercial real estate development trends. We have also collaborated across the entire organization for the key departments that related to that has implication, zoning has implication for them. And tonight we have Nila Lenova from Economic Development, and we also have Tahar from Transportation Engineering, along with all our community planning colleagues. And so this work has really taken a village, as we said in the report. And this is not, this is in the words of Jennifer Patton. And for those of you who know her, she's a longtime city employee, recently retired, a planner with deep knowledge of the district. So she is also part of our team. I wanted to acknowledge her, and no doubt she's making sure that we're doing our job right. So can we just look at the evening agenda? So as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about focusing on the employment zones. There's some meaty discussion and question we have for Mayor and Council, but we wanted to present the bylaw in 3 parts. The first one is want to have an overview of the structure of the new bylaw and how we intend to roll out the new bylaw. So it may be quite dry and technical, but we kind of wanted to give you a flavor of the depth of work that we have to undertake. And then we're going to focus on commercial, light industrial zones. And then we're also going to be talking about a parking section of the bylaw, where you will see that staff are recommending some key strategic updates in order to streamline the application review process. And so it is a lot of material. As I said, we do have a second date reserved for this. And so we'll see how far we go. So I really look forward to the conversation and your questions. With that, I'll pass it on to Tennyson.
Thank you, Yan. I realize I can't actually see the slides. I'm going to wriggle a little bit. Oh, there we go. Yes, yeah, thank you, sorry. Moment, okay. Hello again. So I want to take us through a few slides to just remind us what the project is, what we're trying to achieve, and just kind of set the tone a little bit and give you a general overview before we get into some of the new discussions. So first of all, what is zoning and when is it used? It's a bit of a funny bylaw to have a process on, because so much of the time, even though it affects every single property in the district, people don't think about it, right? You don't need to worry about it 99% of the time. It's only when you're building, because it regulates where you build and how much you build, or when you're looking for a new business location or looking to expand a business, that comes into play. The other thing to keep in mind, we've discussed it earlier this evening, is if a zoning regulation changes and something becomes non-conforming, you do have grandfathered rights. And that is going to be key, but by and large, you'll see that we're trying to keep things with the same intent that they have. We're keeping what's good about that bylaw and moving it forward, and we'll get into the details as we move along. So probably not going to do details on that. Okay, you've all seen us lugging around these big binders. The bylaw is currently something like 1,000 pages. It's a living document written in the 60s. The framework is from the 60s. There's been 1,400 amendments. And while those were all done with great intentions, and some of the recent really good work is coming across to the new one, it's time to modernize. It's very confusing, convoluted. There are layers of regulations on layers of regulations. People we work with regularly are begging us for an update. It needs to be simplified. It needs to be easier to understand. It needs to have zones that show what we're asking and that match our OCP direction. And that's going to be key, and we're going to get into that a little bit later too. And again, when Yan mentioned it takes a village, we have literally been working with every team in the district to think about the policies that council has endorsed and weave them into zoning as appropriate. So it really is about taking policy and codifying it in an up-to-date zoning bylaw. So you've seen these. This is essentially a page I'll refer to from time to time, and it shows the 1965 zones and their equivalent proposed zones. Don't get married to the names, because I tell you, naming a zone is harder than naming my children. It's really tricky. You keep thinking about different ways to say it better. But the intent here is that we are keeping that light touch, implementing the OCP policy, trying to create a seamless transition where if you have a park zone today, there'll be a park zone in the future. We think about the intent of the zones that we have and how we can carry that intent forward, but perhaps in a simpler and less wordy way, and perhaps in a way that requires one zone instead of 19, and, you know, some of those problems that we have. We're really looking to keep a very stable setting for the bylaw so that daily life isn't impacted. The change will happen, but it may happen over the next 60 years, not necessarily over the next 6 months. So just kind of building in on this and giving you an example, right now we have 5 park zones. The intent is to have 2 park zones. The park zones we have are kind of grouped into ones that are about active parks, you know, where you can have sports fields and playgrounds and running tracks. There will still be a parks and outdoor recreation zone that is very much about that. And then we have another set of park zones that are about natural parkland, and we will have a new natural parkland zone, which is primarily focused at thinking about the preservation of the forests, the rivers, but still allows those recreational uses that we love, like running on trails and maybe going kayaking if it's one of the waterfront areas, you know, that kind of thing. So really keeping that intent and moving it forward in a kind of modern system. Another example of this is currently we have a set of institutional zones that are called public assembly, which I always think is a bit of a misnomer because sometimes you assemble, but sometimes you don't. Like, anyway, we are trying to think about what are the public zones that we really need. And we have Capilano University. Why not create a university zone that works for the campus and creates a simple, easy-to-use set of regulations, so should they get a grant for a new building, we're not going through a difficult process like we did when they got the film school money to try to, on a dime, switch and create an opportunity for that building, to essentially tailor it to what they need. Similarly, we have several really key economic drivers in our community that are tourism-based centers that, again, don't have zoning that really works for their sites. And so it's thinking about how we can create a tourist resort zone that works for Capilano, Suspension Bridge, and Grass Mountain. Timeline, Yan touched on this. This project really got going with council's instructions in 2024 to try to work through this project within your mandate. And so that's really what's been driving our timeline. I won't lie though, if we can finish this spring, and it makes it much easier to bring in SMU because we'll have a framework for the bylaw to hang the SMU regulation on, but it's not essential. So this was more about trying to move it forward in your mandate and before the summer break. I'm not married to a date in it, but we are aiming for April introduction. Along the way, of course, you saw a lot of single family discussion last year when we brought it forward in April and again in December. We did complete a draft in December of this past year. And since that time, it's all about refinement, testing, getting out to the interest holders in the community to talk about what the issues are. We're inviting people to reach out and do deeper dives for those people who are interested. We've had a lot of interest holders do that. So again, moving towards April for bylaw introduction, and if council so chooses and it moves smoothly through the process, it could be adopted in either late May, early June, or early July. Community engagement. So as alluded to, there's been quite a lot of work over the last 18 months, and we're really in the stage of direct engagement with stakeholders. I don't think I'll dig into this more, but of course, if there's questions, I can dig into this. You've seen this slide before, but we include it again just as a reminder that whenever you're writing a major project like this, you're trying to balance key council policy, key community directives. So to give you, and tonight we're going to be focusing a lot on the economic development, but we're also going to be thinking a little bit about how to maintain existing development potential and what that means to property owners, along with balancing the other objectives of the community. Here's an example, promoting climate resilience. Look at that black box. So when we're writing any of the regulations, we think about how we can get closer to our goals around addressing the climate crisis we're in and recognizing that we need to be a more resilient community. So we're thinking about more sustainable options. We're looking at how we can encourage more innovative building design, where we can foster biodiversity, and discourage higher risk forms of construction, like the basement discussion we had earlier this evening. A little bit on the form and function or the user experience. One of the great things about having a 1960s thing is there's a lot we can improve. It's going to look a lot better. So yes, it's lots of words. In the old version, we're going to have still some words because they tell the story, but also where we can, we're going to be supplementing that with diagrams, with tables. So especially makes it easier for people who have English as a second language, makes it easier for all of us just to be able to find things, read them easily, move forward. The zones will have consistency, so you'll always know, you start with this bit, you find the landscaping regulations in section so-and-so. It's just gonna be an easier thing to use. There'll be links built into it, and, oh yes, and color. Color is based on the land use map. So when you're going through the document, should it be old school and you're actually paging through, oh, I'm in yellow, that's housing, I'm in red, it's commercial. It's just another visual cue to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so again, we've talked a little bit about implementing it, but I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit more. Yeah, this is looking a little pale, but essentially the zoning map will look very, very similar because what's commercial today will be commercial in the future. But to give you a little bit more detail on what that means, here we have a picture of Marine Drive. And as many of you know, about 20 years ago, it was zoned C9, which is the Marine Drive zone. The Marine Drive zone is for 4 stories of commercial, and it allows commercial on the ground floor and residential above. So to keep that intent of protecting people's property rights, we would replace the C9 zone with a new general commercial C2 zone that is similarly 4 stories, commercial on the ground floor, same density, no change. So that both properties shown in this picture, one that has not redeveloped and one that has redeveloped, will both have the same zone as they do today. The one that has redeveloped would have a set of regulations that matches the building they have. And the one that has not yet redeveloped, should they ever wish to redevelop, would have the same potential that they do today. So it's about recognizing that value. But also, one thing I will note here, and I think there was a question about it, we are not upzoning or pre-zoning. So if the OCP has a site that has higher density than the existing zoning, we are just going with what's on the site today, so that the rezoning process can still unfold the same way it does now, allowing council that same discretion to consider what the community might need through that rezoning process. But as we talk about that rezoning process, we have shelf-ready zones that will match the OCP designation. So imagine you're in a town center, you have an OCP designation for a mixed-use building, you now have a shelf-ready zone that you can rezone to. But not every site will be a perfect fit for that shelf-ready zone, however beautifully we've written it. And so how do we make that work? We don't necessarily want to rely on CD zones for every single application like we've been doing for the last 30 years. Instead, we can have the shelf-ready zone, but if there is something we need to tweak, we have a system called modifiers, where in brackets on the map, you can just add something that tweaks that. So in this case, C1 represents our core commercial zone, a mixed-use zone that can be fairly high density in the town centers. The base height in that zone is 6 stories, but there might be some sites where it's appropriate to go higher. Perhaps the OCP has it at a higher FSR that would accommodate a 12-lot building. So then we can just modify H and then the number of stories. It's just a way of building options and flexibility into the framework of the bylaw, but still allowing council that discretion as they consider individual applications. Okay, that's the end of the overview, the dry part of the outline, as Jan said. Any questions at this point, or do you want me to keep going?
Just anticipating a challenge down the road. So if I have a modifier on there, the modifier is more specific to the individual property, therefore it would overrule, I'm trying to not to use the word trump. It would It went
Try not
over.
to.
So right in the zone is language that would say, this is the height unless the modifier on the map says otherwise.
Right, and but then the problem becomes, the modifier is now, the more specific piece. And so if we went and we changed C2 to, recognize that over time, maybe those general things,
Maybe
we
instead of
would
it should be
also
6,
have to
it should be
change
8.
all of the modifiers that don't conform with that new regulation for C2, because they're more specific, they're in conflict, collision with the C2.
I mean, I don't think it will be a big problem. First of all, wherever possible, we've used the base, but over time, there might be a number of modifiers. But if we were to change the base, say 5-10 years down the line, we have new OCP designations, it's time to refresh those base zones, they're probably going to become more permissive. So more of the sites would conform and wouldn't need a modifier at all. But it would require a bit of an exercise when you update a base zone to think about the implications. But I think when we update base zones, we do try to do that. And I think that would be kind of a necessary step of the work regardless.
Okay, Mr. Wilbur?
Your worship, but the alternative could be that we continue to do these CD zones, right? The challenge is that they're unique unicorns for every property, every time you create a CD zone. And if you were to go with the scenario you suggested, where you want to do a area-wide or neighborhood-wide modification, you're going to have to wrestle with those anyway, right? Under circumstance, what we're hoping to do is clean those up as much as possible through the zoning update process, so that if you ever do go to those area-based discussions, then you're dealing with things like a modifier, which is an easier thing to modify than a full CD zone, which you'd have to pour into.
And we'll get into this a little bit more later on, but especially in the commercial areas, if you have the same zone across multiple lots, then businesses know that they can locate in any of those lots, as opposed to a series of CD zones where they have to read each one to see where they can relocate to or locate in. So I think on the whole, having a system that allows us to use fewer number of zones and more regular zones more of the time will help us. It also, when you have a known zone and you're not rewriting it each time, it's not just less planning time for the planners, being of course selfishly interested here, but it also helps with our property use inspectors, it helps with our plan checkers because it's the same piece. And it helps with our designers and builders in the area because they know what to expect. And I think over time, it may help council too, as you come to know what that zone looks like. And it helps the community because it's a sense of, oh, I know what to expect in this area when they're saying that zone.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, it might be advantageous to put some language in there that's the more specific of the two, the modifier versus the zone, is the predominant one, because, just backcasting and what we did with Marine Drive, so you take C9 zoning through the area, a whole bunch of CDs pop up along the way, because even though the land economists told us that C9 was gonna work, everybody wanted more than that. And then you go and you change C9, and now I have to go through a process to change all the modifiers as well separately. And so if you put something into the legislation that says more recent, more specific is the predominant one, then you can change the base zone and the modifiers you don't have to worry about where there's no conflict. Mr. Rutherford.
Great point. It's a very common standard interpretation clause that you'll include at the beginning of bylaws that refers to the more restrictive or the more limiting is essentially the one that is used. And so that deals with if there is any internal conflicts that are somehow missed. Hopefully there wouldn't be any, since this is a brand new bylaw from start to end. But when its bylaws get 60 years old, sometimes those internal conflicts that exact kind of interpretation clause can resolve.
Okay, I just need to add here, you know what's happened? Our mayor has become a planning nerd. I just love it.
I'm in the weeds, but I just think that's, we're trying to save ourselves future work on some of these things.
Oh, absolutely.
Councilor Muir.
So if we use Marine Drive as the example of what not to do, when we blanket zoned it, is it the CD zones that are preventing us from looking at that broader change to incorporate professional offices on a second floor, the three, and I know
That's the
you're,
next part.
okay. I saw a whole bunch of circles with lines through it, and because that's a huge issue. And, okay, so that's the next part, but I'll stay in this part for a moment, just because I want to just check on what the uses are, and if you're going to tell us what those uses are under, and if they're the same as they've always been in the last 15 years in regards to parkland. Because we did have a time when PRO included mausoleums. And we never thought we were going to get an application for a mausoleum, and we did, 7 feet into the earth. And
12 stories, was it?
something like that. And so that's what created this need to redefine what these zones meant, to pull out those uses. So I think the uses, for us to just understand what those uses are as well, not just the zone, but understanding what's allowed under the zone, is what I've always understood, and it's always been helpful. So
Yeah.
I don't see that
So-
list anywhere, but if it's coming.
No, and really, I was trying to figure out, where do we start to tell this story? I'm absolutely happy to come back and do a deep dive on parks. The other thing is, we can also make the entire package available. Like, this is, anybody who's been asking for it, we've been sending.
It's not a
them links.
secret.
It's not a
Yeah.
secret, it's
We
not
get to
behind
look at
closed doors.
Yeah.
But essentially, the old park zones, they talked about buildings and,
Yeah,
and things you could build instead of the things you could do. And so really, parks are about recreation. And so what we're trying to do is create some clarity around how you recreate and what that enables you to do.
okay, but that's an important part for us to understand, because it's different for everyone, and we need to understand what that impact is as well,
Yeah.
right?
And that might be one of the topics we bring back in the next section. Is
Okay,
happy to do a deeper dive. We are going to PNIAC next week on this, for example, so.
okay, I'll wait for the rezoning of Marine Drive until we get to the next section.
PNIAC stands for Parks and Natural Environments
Yes.
Committee, so there you go. Okay, I don't see any questions, let's proceed.
Here we go.
Thank you, Tamsin. So this is my cue, and you mentioned uses. Oh, we're going to dive into uses shortly. But I want to take a few minutes through your worship just to address council and really set the stage a little bit for the employment zones work, because I know council has made comments along the way around how we're implementing our industrial zones and commercial zones and so on. So really, this is the first time we're kind of bringing it together as a package to you. And so I also want to talk a little bit about some key factors to consider, sort of what's happening on the ground, what are the trends and so on. So we recognize that the issues around commercial and industrial space availability and uses are deep and long. And so I just want to assure you, we're only starting this work. So we're taking advantage of the zoning bylaw rewrite process to really lift the work on this work, the lid on this work, and let you know that this is going to be ongoing, it's going to be incremental, it's going to be intentional work. And of course, what grounded this for us is the economic development strategy. So we're starting to roll out implementation of the economic development strategy. We have only begun consultation with interest groups around the commercial and industrial zones, and this will be ongoing. It is part of this process. It will continue as we create the zones, and we release the package, and we'll continue after June 30th because there's a lot more to do down the line. So just to use a metaphor, this is not a marathon. Sorry, this is not a sprint. It is a marathon. Even came out wrong, but it is really the first opportunity to tackle the policies of the economic development strategy. And just to remind you, on the commercial side, we are looking to add space, and we're looking to commercial space. We're looking to do this through more retail at grade in our mixed-use developments, and also look at office or service type uses at second level or around the corner in our town centers and along transit corridors. This is one of the key policies of the economic development strategy. And then on the industrial side, we have two objectives. We want to protect our major industrial sites for industrial use and trade enabling infrastructure. And we also want to look at our light industrial land use and really look at how are we going to optimize this land to accommodate the business growth that we expect coming in. So in terms of phasing, by June 30th, what we aim to achieve, provided that all of this package goes forward, we are looking to retain the current level of and types of uses across the employment zones that are currently in play. And with one small exception, and that will come up probably. And also we're looking to prepare some of these shelf-ready zones that Tamsin mentioned for commercial and industrial sites to look how to unlock that future redevelopment potential to accommodate that incremental change, market-driven, aligned with our future employment zones, work and market conditions. So when we're done, when we create these shelf zones, it is very likely that not a whole lot of sites will actually fit under those shelf zones. Our follow-on work will align with the 5-year span of the economic development strategy, just to remind you how big this project is. We'll then focus on what are the parameters and conditions that are needed to effectively implement these new shelf zones. And we're looking at determining the sites, the additional policy updates that we might have to do, any incentives in our light industrial areas that we might need to provide or examine, and any other tools that are needed to successfully transition what our current commercial and industrial areas look like to what our new desired state is, as stated by the economic development strategy. And now just shifting gears very quickly, I think that's my next slide. I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of what our context is today. So there's some key factors to consider that are related to what the current state of our employment space is and where we want to go or where we need to go. First, we will need 4.2 million square feet of additional employment space to meet across all categories, industrial, commercial, and institutional, to meet our employment needs to 2050. This is in addition to
2050?
2050, yes, 2050. So we have 17 million today, and we will need 4.2 million more.
Do you have a number? How many more workers is that?
I think I might have to ask Adam if he remembers, because that came as part of the economic development strategy. I think
11,150.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't
5
have a
C-SPANs.
new
Sorry,
bridge.
what was your number?
Yeah, we don't have a
So
bridge.
that's a difference over 30 years of 11,150 additional net workers.
That use boats to get to work instead of cars.
Okay, Ms. Silova?
So only about 20% of the district's land that is developable for employment purposes, and there's no vacant lands. So what that means is employment space will need to be added through intensification on existing lands, on existing sites, and within existing growth areas. Huge limitation. Our second big factor here is our vacancy rates, and this is usually vacancy rates are a snapshot in time, but it has been consistent over the last 5 years that I've been tracking the vacancy rates. We have some of the lowest in the region across our classes. And just to give you an example, our commercial vacancy is 1%. Our industrial vacancy is 2%. So any real estate folks that you ask, or any business that you ask, that is extremely considered unhealthy for businesses, meaning business has simply nowhere to go. There's no options to grow, there's no options to relocate, there's no options to move from one location to another within the district. So huge constraint, so we need to be working on that and adding that space. Other significant trends I wanted to mention are a little bit outside of, they impact district businesses, but they also are sort of regional and outside of district trends, impact a whole lot of businesses. The long-term trend towards transitioning to a service-based economy, which is related to population growth generally. So we think that about 70% of local businesses serve local population needs, so very service-oriented. On the flip side, the strategic and ongoing role of the Port of Vancouver as a gateway to international trade, and that role may be intensifying in the current climate, who knows. And of course, the need to preserve that trade enabling infrastructure and lands. Some other emerging trends, and I think Tamsin kind of touched upon these, is our major tourism operators need to adjust their operating models to address the impacts of climate change and so as to remain viable. So this is one thing that we're considering. And last but not least, while we're looking at Capilano University, universities are starting to look at their land banks to figure out how do we remain financially and operationally sustainable in the current student environment and financial shortages. And so some big overarching trends that impact us locally, I wanted to give you that flavor. So when we start the discussion on the different zones, it is the economic development strategy policy that we're looking to start implementing. We're only lifting the lid on this work. And please keep in mind these market factors as we move through the discussion, because they are very much the key things that influence our business. If there's no questions on any of this, I'll pass it over. Oh, yes, please.
We don't have so many.
Just slide. We don't have
Myself
questions.
and Councilor Miri, what population data is this predicated on? Is this the province's BC Vital Statistics, the census numbers, the growth projections for Metro Vancouver? What's driving the need for 4.2 million square feet of additional employment space in terms of its relationship to population?
Through your worship, we're so fortunate to actually have the team that did the economic development strategy analysis, because this is what this data is based on. So this work was done in 2023 and released in 24. And I believe the latest numbers we used were Metro Vancouver's 2050 projections, yeah.
They were, drafted in Metro Vancouver 2050, so I believe there were some minor tweaks, but for the most part, for the district, I believe they're in the same ballpark. And they were based on employment by sector. We did break out that 4.2 between commercial, industrial, and institutional jobs as well. I tied them back to my use based on trends at the time as we understood them, about how much floor space you would need roughly per worker within the district, recognizing the constraints and changing nature of work.
What 2050 population do you think is on the back end of that?
On the back end of that, given the timing we were working with, that was prior to the changes, the immigration numbers that had changed. So I believe that there might be a slight softening in some of those numbers, but I don't have the exact change for comparison set on hand right now, unfortunately.
That would be interesting to see though.
Yeah, unfortunately, within all of the decisions we're getting from Metro and Translink and others,
Yeah.
they're blending a bunch of different number
Yeah.
sources, thinking that diversification is going to solve the prediction and forecasting problem. And the reality is we probably lost about 1,700 people in the district of North Vancouver in the last year. And so it's a lot of the bases for predictions for growth are challenging.
Where's that number from?
We're waiting on the fourth quarter results. That's based on the third quarter results of last year, the population. And it's a blending of two things. It's about 1,200 people-ish of net loss, but a transfer of about 400 people from being counted in the district to being counted in West Van. That's the area around International Plaza. They're as a group now, but counted entirely. So I'm not including the 400 that's just a straight transfer, because that's not contemplating new growth or new losses. But we knew that the provincial numbers were expecting in Q1 last year, a 40,000 person increase approximately, and we went down by 1,500. Q2, again, supposed to be an increase, we went down by 2,500 and province-wide. And then Q3, again, predicted an increase and we went down, I think, by about 14,000 during Q3. So we're all still waiting on the Q4 numbers from last year to get a better picture on what the actual numbers, annual numbers are.
I'm still not getting what the source of those numbers is.
It's BC Vital Statistics, I believe.
Oh.
Mr. Wilbur?
Worship, two sources we look at, BC Stats does population projections. They have a certain formula, they call people projections. They adjust it and periodically when the census data comes in. So they do what both actually estimates of current population as well as population projections. Metro Vancouver also updates their scenarios periodically. I think the last ones we have to work with are about the Metro Vancouver medium growth scenario to 2041 is about 114,000 people in the district. But again, they always modify and tweak. And we all know that there were significant modifications with respect to students and with respect to immigrants that have affected population right across Canada. And so that is an adjustment that Metro Vancouver, BC Stats, everybody's trying to adapt to. The one point I would make though, I know that number looks like a very, very large number.
It is.
We aren't proposing to pre-zone 4.2 million square feet of development. And also I thought, I just very quickly checked back to see, to give you some context of growth, how much commercial and how much industrial square footage has net increased since council approved their OCP in 2011. And it's around 350,000 square feet of new commercial and around 400,000 square feet of new industrial square footage since the OCP adopted in 2011, so around 15 years. So that gives you an idea of scale of uptake. And through that whole time, we've had very low vacancy, even with that increase.
The big number is the vacancy number that what the businesses are concerned about, because this is what is creating the squeeze on the rents. This is what is creating the squeeze on business uses and things like that. It's a good point that it's a moving target, and probably the next good number or decent number we're going to get is from the census, the 2026 census. That is somewhat, but it is a moving target. And I should mention that I think when the housing legislation started coming in and there were a whole slew of new numbers being thrown, and of course employment and jobs waits for all these big numbers like population and housing and all of these to get determined incomes after. We took the high scenario because of the new housing agenda when we were doing the estimates for the economic development strategy. So possibly that number is overestimated at this rate. If we are looking to build capacity to meet our 2050 targets, if it's 200 or even if it's 1 million square feet less, if that 1 million square feet was in the market today, we won't have the business issues that we're having in the North Shore.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It just seemed like a big number because I think Vancouver's number is 6 million. That they have 6 million square feet of planned over the next 10 years, but they have 10 times as much population as us. And so for them absorbing 6 million in that fraction of the same amount of time, it seems like we have a very high ratio. And that the challenge is, this is probably for the discussion afterward, but the challenge would be, I don't have a bridge. We don't have a replacement plan for the bridges. And our current traffic problems from the time of the OCP start, we're fighting against the narrative in the community. The community believes that it's because that the traffic problems are because the population's increased on the North Shore. And the reality is it's because the number of workers has increased on the North Shore quite dramatically in that time. And so when you tell me we need to, over the next 25 years, get another 11,000 additional jobs on the North Shore, that catches my attention. I've got Councillor Murray and Councillor Murray.
I think it's a combination of everything. It's 3 different municipalities. It's, people living in West Van and working in North Van and vice versa. People coming onto the North Shore, off the North Shore to work. I mean, the line going over the bridge in the morning is as long as the line's coming over the bridge right now. It's not, it used to be a little bit more skewed. Now it's even. So, there's all sorts of different reasons, and you and I can discuss that whole scenario. You think that development doesn't add to the traffic because there's a significant amount of development that's being, seen in the city of North Vancouver, and people move back and forth. The lineup going to Seymour in the morning, into the Seymour, and you would say, where are they going? But they are coming into the Seymour. When we talk about this squeezing of the rents, is that like what? Is that because we've done little to look at the change of some of our industrial areas, for instance? I know you've had a discussion with some local realtors that have given you, that are commercial realtors, long time, 30-year commercial realtors in the community that would like to continue the discussion. So I'm glad we're giving opportunities to those groups to come forward and talk more. Because I think they have a lot to say about real time. And I've mentioned this before, that we don't always as governments operate very well in real time because things change so quickly and we don't pivot. So how much of that is, you know, not changing the zoning bylaw for so long and not addressing these things? I feel like we can see these problems, they begin to fester, and then we just do nothing. We don't pivot. I can't wait till we get to the second story of the commercial, because I've been talking about that for 10, 15 years, and we won't pivot. So is that's the crux of it?
Through your worship to Councillor Murray, there's many factors behind the vacancy rate. It's hard to say. It's, you know, half of it is because of this and half of it. The point is it is low, and it is what is driving some of these costs. Both our industrial and commercial rates, both of them are high compared to the rest of the region. And I speak generically the rest of the region because we get the averages. We are close to Vancouver on some of this, just to give you a comparison. Our commercial rates are about 50, I heard 60 per square foot. And our industrial are about 30, light industrial is about 30 per square foot. And it is those unhealthy levels of vacancy that are squeezing both markets. There's the pecking order of the markets, right? You have the light industrial, you have the retail, the office, light industrial, and then you go to other uses and residentials beyond that. So there's that cascading spillover effect in the squeeze. So squeeze, and
Yeah.
rents go up and up and up.
And then I would be also interested in understanding what's happening with the report that was brought to Metro, because there was, you know, it was intensification, and you talked about that, the intensification of light industrial. And, you know, I see that it's more about expanding beyond the urban containment boundary, rezoning, you know, parkland to light industrial or, you know, commercial. And then parkland to residential, and it's all moving around. The level of intensity in the discussion that exists when we're looking at expanding beyond the urban containment boundary in the region is not happening. Like, where is the intensification of light industrial? And the report was good, and it was like, yes, okay, this is some of the solution. We can go up, we can rise up in industrial. It does not all have to be, you know, spread out. And yet, is it really happening?
Yeah, go ahead.
The report question was excellent. They covered a lot of the details about what is needed to go up. Industrial is at that precipice where buildings are starting to pencil, where you can do two-story warehouses. You're seeing where they can build the ramp surrounding the trucks out there. But there are many factors especially in the Metro Vancouver, Lower Mainland context, that make it very difficult for those buildings to be economic.
Right.
They need to be large enough. They need to be close enough to major infrastructure. It's very difficult to build a multi-story industrial parcel on small lots where you do not have the entitlements to build that high. And even if you do allow the density, sometimes if there's, as Neil mentioned, competing uses that may otherwise be more economically viable, they might outcompete that industrial use, for example. So it can be very difficult to create the opportunities for industrial intensification. Sometimes you need to bring in other types of employment. But that also does bring in risks for squeezing out some of the existing industrial that may still be looking for that older, smaller lot, bay type. And so it is a very challenging, very nuanced discussion that goes into this. You are right, though, that this leads to some discussions about, do we find easy land further afield where appropriate, and do we try to intensify in certain areas where appropriate? There's also geological considerations, the type of land that we take it. So many
And
challenges.
access.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then my other question, and maybe I hope this is going to be covered too, is that we made a decision, you know, many years ago to allow childcare in every zone. And we allowed it in light industrial zones. And so what has that done?
Got a slide on that?
Okay, I am just predicting the next, I didn't even look forward in the 60s to slide deck. It was frightening.
Excellent.
Councilor Mott.
Thank you. I think I remember this 11,000 number from when the economic strategy was presented. And that's supposed to be by 2050. I was just wondering, do you have any sense of the 11,000 forecasted new employees? How many will be living on the North Shore and potentially commuters. And the reason I bring this up is when we talk to the chamber now, that's a challenge. Even in our current situation, the chamber is saying we can't find employees because they can't live in North Shore, or if they get a job, they can get the same job in Coquitlam, or they can get it here. If they get it here, they have to drive for 2 hours. So they're not going to come here. So I'm just wondering, does this take into account what needs to happen on housing? So it's great. I'm all for business, but what else needs to happen? And is that taken into account somehow?
Mr. Miller?
Just take a first stab at that, others are happy to jump in. Affordable housing in the North Shore is an economic development initiative. That's the way I would describe it. So when we ask our businesses what some of their key issues are, obviously it changes with different circumstances. Many folks would mention tariffs and those kind of concerns now too. But on the North Shore, consistently folks mention the transportation issues and housing. So all of council's efforts around inclusionary zoning, working with the province, the federal government around funding affordable housing opportunities, so social housing in the community, those will benefit local workers. And that we hear time and time again from our business industry that those policy initiatives, which the zoning bylaw will help implement through council discussion. Now we're straying into policy discussions, right, which are kind of at the OCP level. The zoning, and I'll bring it back to the zoning presentation tonight, we're really looking at implementing the OCP direction you've already given, which talks about more housing in centers, close to transit, so that these folks can move to their jobs as easy as possible along the shore. That's the whole point, and that's hit on a key issue.
I can follow up with that. And Tamsin, you mentioned something about not pre-zoning on a broad scale, but we also potentially are looking at inclusionary zoning. Rezoning. So how does that jive?
Okay, so we've been following along with community planning as you think about the merits and the viability of inclusive zoning. We've structured the framework of the zoning bylaw, the draft one, so that every zone has a line that says inclusionary zoning, ? And essentially, if it works, either now or at some point in the future, it's easy to build that in. And the way inclusionary zoning has worked in other municipalities that have started to explore this, and we met with planners from Vancouver and somewhere else earlier in this process, was you have a reference in individual zones to a section or a chapter, if you will, that has the rates and the requirements. And that way you're really just updating one page of your bylaw as those requirements might change over time. But the individual zones reference the percentage or the aspect that's required. And again, those modifiers we talked about earlier, that very nerdy thing, well, you can have IZ, inclusionary zoning, as a modifier. So not every site, so you could have the same zone across an area, but if it's only feasible to have inclusionary zoning on a few properties within that area or in the denser area as opposed to the less dense area, then you can apply it as appropriate to the study at the time. So we're very much protecting for that potential should we have the economic viability to explore that and should council wish to explore that. But we're not presupposing what you ultimately decide.
Just one last one. Sorry, is it Adam?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, if I heard you right, about like light industrial zone, like there's going to be competing interests and, operators. And some businesses can afford the higher rents. So.
We're diving into the next section. Yeah.
Okay, because we need to find a way, in my mind, we need to find a way to not quite curate the space, but encourage certain businesses that are part of that zone, not necessarily excluding others, but like that's a balancing act. Like a perfect example, I love Ridge Brewing, but they're in a light industrial area. That changes the whole market.
I think everybody is very anxious to get to those topics.
Okay.
To get to them. Are there any other questions? I didn't anticipate questions just on my little slides, but Tamsin, take us away.
We're good? Okay. So we're going to start with a discussion around the commercial zones. We do have a discussion on industrial coming after that. So If it's just on commercial right now, it's okay, there's more to come.
Okay,
So, commercial task. For several years, we've been talking about the scourge of the dentists, if you will, right? The
the medical office, yeah.
the medical offices, and of course, I also need to go to the dentist sometimes, so I totally realize we need those healthcare professionals. But it's that desire to see our streets be vibrant shopping streets. And I know in recent applications, I've done it too, where I've written zoning bylaws for individual sites, where I've worked with developers and said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if these CRUs could just be for restaurant or retail uses, because we really want the vibrancy. So when we started this process, that was where I was thinking, right, we'll write a zone, we'll limit the uses to just retail and restaurant uses, and all of the other uses can go upstairs. Made sense. Right, so then we started thinking about how that works. So, and zoning is only one tool. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I might come back to this afterwards, though we kind of covered it. I'll also come back to this one, because I want to dig straight into the use, sorry. I will get there, but this is exciting.
Oh my God, take a breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow down.
Okay, sorry. Right. So, essentially, when we started by looking at individual neighborhoods, and you'll see a lot of slides on Adjourned, and I started with Adjourned because it's our most successful. It's the one where everybody loves that village. It feels lovely. It's got great cafes, it's got nice restaurants. It feels like the right mix. Interesting. But when you start to look at, and the next slides will show you, it's actually 40% of the uses are not restaurant or retail. And it's walking distance, so I can go there at lunchtime, and I watch. And all kinds of people are coming for those other purposes, right? Whether it's to renew your insurance, to take your dog to the vet, those kinds of things are bringing people to the village. And that helps keep the village more vibrant. And while there, they might stop and pick up a coffee or get that card for so-and-so's birthday. It just helps that vitality of the community. The other thing, and this comes back to Neo's point about vacancy rates and also about our limited supply. If we don't permit these uses at grade, where else do they go? So let's dig into this a little bit more. So here are some pictures from Edgemont. We've got several banks in Edgemont. We've got an optometrist. Well, an optometrist is one of those medical uses, but it also has that retail component, right? It's a cost. We've got, and it's not on this slide, but we've got the new pharmacy next to the Beyond Bar that has a medical office built into it. And you're seeing more and more pharmacies are doing that combined piece. Well, the pharmacy is retail, but the medical piece is that health office. So right away, we're starting to get into some fuzzy area. Barbershop is a classic one for saying, oh yeah, that's a Main Street use. Well, what about the hair salon? Well, maybe that's okay, but the hair salon often has the facials or the manicures or the other things built in. So it becomes this slippery slope. And yes, you could write definitions, but they become very, very picky. If we just went with that retail restaurant only, immediately 40% of our long-term businesses become non-conforming. They could continue to operate, but they could never relocate in the village. So that seems like a problem to us. So we started to think about different ways of doing this. And this is that list of uses again, recognizing the variety that's there. I won't dig into it too much. We also looked at Marine Drive because it felt like that one had lots of healthcare offices. Then we started looking at the numbers and walking around and walking around because so often Marine Drive, you drive around, right? And the reality is there are actually a lot of restaurants, but they're hidden, like Tim Hortons, very popular cafe, not really cafe, culture cafe, but a coffee shop.
You call it a restaurant.
But it's hidden behind a sea of parking. White Spot is the one that bugs me the most because the building is right on the street, but they've put paper or whatever over their windows and they've turned to face the parking lot. And so many of them are doing that. We do have a lot of restaurant and retail uses. It's actually still a 30 to 40% mix of uses that are that would be non-conforming, but it's how it's built, which now I'll go backwards for a moment, comes the other part of zoning, where there are some things we can very simply do through zoning about bringing the buildings right. And that whole why we don't want a 1960s bylaw, this is one of those things. In the 60s, we were car happy. And we had just built the bridge, and we were building all of these suburbs, so our zones were written for cars. Today, when we write a commercial zone, we want to make sure the buildings are close to the sidewalk. We want to move the parking around the back, and underground. We want to keep the commercial uses on the at grade, and move the residential up back. Now back to the use discussion. So when we started to think about this, our sense is, given the limited options, we were very, very nervous about limiting uses in our general commercial zone. Doesn't mean that we can't do it in our core commercial zone, but we were very cautious to do it at this time with so few options. But if we do want to do it, there are a couple of tools. So one, we can restrict commercial uses. So, sorry, that's B on this list. So let's look at B a little bit more. We could kind of look at that list of things that are happening and kind of focus in on the traditional vibrant uses. The worry, of course, and people like Adam and Neo can speak to this far more knowledgeably than I can, is that you may end up with sites sitting vacant because so many of your uses now kind of prefer that. We have that problem with where do businesses evolve. And then the other thing to keep in mind is when you have options for upstairs, many businesses do choose the cheaper rents upstairs if they don't need that storefront visibility. But some businesses that are starting out especially do want that visibility. So they may not need the main street location, maybe they want the side street location, but they do want that location. So it is possible to do this, but it's not our recommendation at this moment. And then the third thing, and many of you know that West Van uses this, is that they try to restrict uses by locations. They will say, well, you can have a bank, but only one per block or one per 500 meters. Again, it becomes us regulating in the market. The market may work better without us dipping into this. And in some cases, uses that are regulated are sometimes regulated almost in almost a form of microaggression, where a use may be seen as something that we're not familiar with, but it may actually be very critical use for segments of our community, perhaps for new immigrants. So we do have to be very careful about the types of uses and why we want to restrict them in certain locations. If it's a vibrancy, it's one thing, but sometimes other layers come into this. And then the last point here is that often uses cluster. Many of you know I'm quite outdoorsy, and I used to love it when in Vancouver they still had Mountain Equipment Co-op on Warburg, because you had all the bike shops and all the outdoor shops close together. It made it really easy to go shopping. Well, all kinds of uses like to do that, where you might have several health offices close together, close to a lab, or close to or close to the pharmacy. So there are reasons why it may be beneficial to not regulate use by location as well. But does that mean we've given up? No. We are thinking very much about the general commercial zone, which would be primarily for 3 to 4 story buildings, having commercial required on the ground floor, residential uses can only be on upper floors, and being more permissive. But as we then think about sites that would be rezoning in our town centers, that would be our opportunity to do a couple of key things. One, we can right away require more commercial space. And maybe I should use the words employment generating space, because on the upstairs, some of those commercial uses might actually be institutional uses as well. moving things like the childcares off the main street, moving things like the yoga studios upstairs, moving the dentist offices upstairs, and also just increasing the sheer amount of space you have. It's also that on some sites in our town centers, it might be also about expanding the commercial from just the main street where it might be today to around the corner, so that over time, you have more side streets, you have more rear streets, your commercial areas become more vibrant because it's a network, not just a single street. So this is something that we can have the shelf-ready zone, use it as properties come in to redevelop, and as part of that redevelopment, as more square footage is added, if we really want to curate the uses, this would be the place to do it. That's my recommendation, but of course, we're open to your input, and sorry, I tend to get excited, so didn't mean to overspeak there. So this is where we're pausing for another set of comments, tried to follow the kind of layout of last night. So our recommendation is to allow the full mix of uses on the ground floor in that general commercial zone that would be applied quite broadly. But as sites redevelop, we would expand the potential and then potentially curate those uses. And again, we have those options for bringing in restrictions at this time, if this is a key issue for council at this moment. And maybe I'll pause there, turn it over.
Again, this isn't the time for debating the merits. This is about questions, clarifications, and questions along the way. So I've got Councillor Miri back and Councillor Miri.
So is there no market to allow a second floor of office or childcare on Marine Drive above the retail for those properties that haven't yet developed, and add 3 stories? Maybe 4.
I'll take a stab at this one. Yeah, through your worship, I think it's general rule of thumb is that you need about at least 6 stories for a 2-level commercial to be viable at the very minimum conditions. And so when you add construction costs and some of the exacerbating sort of market situation that we're in, it's become even more challenging. But you need a little bit more density to allow that second level to go in a sort of a what's considered mid-rise.
So in order to get that second floor of office, you need 6 stories of residential?
Through your worship, the councillor, it completely depends on the site. 6 stories may be appropriate for some landowners to move forward. But generally, there's a lot of challenge when you go from 4 to 6 stories in terms of engineering a building, especially if you're splitting uses. They need different access roads, elevators, etc. That create all sorts of different challenges for costs that may make them still want to stay with 1 floor of residential and 3 stories of,
One-
1 floor of commercial and 3 stories of residential, rather than going to the 6.
What about minimums and maximums in the unit size?
That can be an option. This is a discussion we have with many municipalities about carrots and sticks in the policy about a requirement versus an incentive, and trying to find a balance between the 2.
Yeah, the city of North Vancouver did that in Lower Lonsdale successfully, where they put minimums and maximums in order to encourage diversity in their shopping and their street front. So if I had to compare Marine Drive and Ambleside every day. There's no shopping on Marine Drive, unless you're going to, not the outdoor stores, but unless you're going to healthcare centers, which are regional, or banks. And, this is where, we have to pivot in some way and restrict. Edgemont has 5 banks, 5. And I think sometimes what we do is we look at these things blanket. Half the buildings in Edgemont are old, very old, they're original. So, how do we square, what's happening? There are empty buildings up there right now, Zigzag's empty and, it's been empty for a while. So I don't think we can apply a one size fits all. So how do we square these very different areas and not look at it as sort of a blanket approach?
Can I just add,
Yeah.
just respond to the Marine Drive question related to your previous question. I think we do anticipate Marine Drive, sites along Marine Drive to be redeveloped and possibly through rezoning. because we're not prohibiting rezoning. And so what Thompson is recommending is that in that rezoning scenario, where you would be able to go above C9 height, which is only 4-story, then she is recommending we're going to be asking for additional commercial space. And so then we're going to restrict the ground floor use, and then so it's only retail and restaurant.
So but this drawing shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories of residential, and then to the ground, oh yeah, that's 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It does require, I think when I said the 6-story, it is probably 6-story minimum, where you'd be looking at a 2-level commercial
And that's
implementation.
Or
Right.
7. 7 with the commercial in the office, but 5 of
I'm
residential.
sorry, when I saw this image, I actually thought the top was intended as a rooftop access. It's just a sketch. It was really just to kind of say,
Oh, okay.
kind of 2 and 4 or more. Because some of our town centers will be sites that are like the Grousons or the Seal and Tower type sites, where you're in the OCP, it's a 3.5 FSR or even higher in the future. And so you would be doing a tower, but the base could be 2 or more stories of commercial.
Did you look back, this is my last question, did you look back to what, to the past, to see what we've done? Like, if you look at Deep Cove used to have butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. You did not have to leave. You could have the best cut of meat, the best seafood, you could buy a diamond ring, you could get your hair cut, go to the dentist, buy milk, buy groceries. You did not have to leave the village. You have to leave every single day now because you cannot buy a carton of milk in Deep Cove. It doesn't exist. And it's all about tourism. And we've allowed that to happen. And so I think we have to look back in order to look forward. And I think our apprehension to, not change a lot of these things only through when redevelopment happens is not going to change very quickly and create the level of diversity that whole blanket zoning, which, of course, hindsight's 2020 was a disaster. Okay, I'm not debating. I just was hoping that we were going to make some bigger changes in this regard, because I think, it needs it in a lot of areas. But and then you talk about the shopping malls, like, we drive. We have to drive to these places. We need places to park to go shopping. Seniors like going to Lynn Valley Mall because it's covered when it rains and they can park.
So just again, when staff started out the discussion, they said the purpose is not to make the change, the purpose is to consolidate the zoning.
I know, but
And there may be a future discussion about changes, generally speaking, but we're minimizing the changes. We're trying to just say, this is how you could really simplify the documentation process. Ms. Lova.
Yeah, through your worship, the C1, if you don't mind just looking back to that slide, this zone, the shelf zone that we're talking about, we're really looking at the comprehensive development zones in our town centers. So just to give perspective, think about Salem was kind of the model that we looked at. If we are going to add substantial commercial, it is going to have to be in the town centers. And Marine Drive is a different scenario with the general commercial. It's quite long. It will not redevelop fast to begin with. Compared to Ambleside, it's a new development area. But this zone, I just want to make it clear that this zone is designed for what's going to happen in our town centers, where we are going to have the density, where 6 is minimum. We're looking at 8, 12, 30. Oh, thank you. But where actually office, second-story office will be viable as a construction project. So we're kind of future-proofing the growth that we're thinking is coming into town centers. And
so you're talking about the east side or the west side of Mountain Highway and the commercial and redeveloping that. That's what this is about. That now I'm getting worried, because that commercial needs to be protected in that light industrial down there.
We're not necessarily.
Because the rest of it's been built out.
Yeah, I think there's going to be.
So this is for the sites that are designated mixed use in the OCP, not the sites that are designated industrial.
Or industrial. So these are mixed use, CRMU, in the OCP designated sites.
It would be good if we had a map to see where they are, because I think we've tried to do that and it hasn't worked. We don't have mixed use in Lower Lions Gate, and we don't have it in Inland Creek. There's no shopping. It's, you know, a nail salon and a little market and, you know, a cafe. You know, we didn't put the minimums and maximums in, and we have nothing in Lions Gate.
I think that's part of that conversation, is that the zoning, we're setting out that framework. So as sites redevelop and the OCP gets updated for the local area plan, there is a mechanism to allow more commercial and then to restrict the ground floor commercial uses.
Okay, thank you.
I love maps too. That's great.
Yeah, let's get a map.
Councillors back and Pope. Councillor back.
Thank you. This is a really interesting topic, and I think it's great to look at this as the opportunity to look at diversifying our town centers and kind of creating those vibrant neighborhoods that we want. When I read this report, my immediate concern is that we would be locking in the sort of change that we want to see in relying on redevelopment to make that happen. And as Councilor Murray's pointed out, that could be 20, 30 years away. And, you know, Edgemont Village is used as an example, and I agree. I think the mix of commercial and Edgemont Village is excellent, but there's usually a lot of banks, and I don't think it's a success because of the banks. I think it's a success in spite of them, and it could be better. And I just don't see this as actually changing any of that and kind of making them town centers what we want them to be. And what we've been doing hasn't worked. So, you know, that's where we end up with these examples of, you know, childcare
On the street.
on ground level on a prime corner, you know, picking up one in Lynn Valley right now. It's like,
Light industrial.
we need childcare, but, you know, those are prime for retail and other uses that are more what people want to see.
I think Mr. Loba had some additional.
Yes, through your worship, Councillor Beck, we struggle with the same thoughts. Our biggest constraint right now is where these businesses going to go,
Yeah.
because citizens.
Is where the what's going to go?
Where are those type of businesses going to go? If we institute the restriction today, if we become restrictive on some of these uses, the bank will have absolutely nowhere. The bank will go to industrial because there's
Banks are changing though.
I use the bank as an example, but the ones that population need access to, doctors, vets, whatever you want to, those, we call them, non-permeable uses, those that are closed off to the street. We have 40% of our current commercial space, and just to give you in numbers, because I did the number crunching, we assigned that permeability factor. Is this a use that is open to the, retail and restaurant, or is it other use that tends to get closed off? 40% of our businesses, period, in our commercial zones are of that non-permeable type, meaning those businesses serve a purpose and they have nowhere else to go. So if we actually shut down today and make it all restaurants and retailers, low margin businesses that hardly can afford the rents that are out there right now, where are these businesses gonna go, and are we exposing these new spaces to be unattainable for the businesses that we want there? So it's a more complex problem time is actually in our favor because we can institute change over time. But taking that measure, we're talking about 500 businesses that are, if we were to kind of cut put the hammer down and say, no more of these uses, we'll only have those animating uses.
They're just
500
non-conforming.
500 businesses will be non-conforming.
We're okay with
And those
basements.
new ones that are coming up, the chiropractor and the, all these kind of uses, they have nowhere to go because we don't have a second story. We don't have the space around the corner to put them. And so people will still have to drive somewhere to get that service, and they will.
Additional comments from Adam?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think one thing that's really important in this discussion is the challenge with what you're seeing today. When you're seeing these other uses compete for retail space, which are then like offices that are coming down below the ground floor, and then those retail spaces that are ending up in light industrial, is because of the de facto lack of space across the board here right now. And so a real thing we saw right from when we were running the economic development strategy, and this has only actually gotten worse since then with the numbers we've looked at since then, is without adding new space, you're going to have this challenge. Even if you start, a real question is how do we build more space with the land we have? That is going to be a question, as many councils have mentioned right now, about trying to encourage reinvestment in a timely manner to get that space built. And hopefully that will be usable by a range of users right now. Because if you have a limited set of pie, the people that can pay more for that pie are going to generally get the prime pieces of it. So it's a question of how do we grow the pie. But at the same time, if we restrict too harshly who can use that space, then that will also restrict who's willing to invest in creating new space. So staff are trying to be very conscientious about this as they move forward with this policy. It will take a fair bit of fine tuning as we move forward with a number of the stakeholders that they're speaking to. But I think a big thing we want to keep in mind through this discussion is how do we grow the pie so that everyone can have a slice.
I'm just gonna finish, my last comment is that we're kind of from what I can tell from this report, we're treating all commercial areas the same. And I feel like we have high streets, which I would describe Edgemont, Lynn Valley, Lynn Creek, we want to create these sort of areas where that's where we have the patios and the restaurants and the, retail. I don't think they can be treated the same as every other commercial area. I think if we really want to see change in those areas, we have to be hyper-focused on making the change and curating it to the best of our ability. I appreciate this as a challenge, and we certainly don't want to displace any current businesses, but.
Just to play devil's advocate
Yeah.
for a moment.
Yeah.
What commercial area shouldn't we be focused that way on? Because to me, we only have commercial in places where we actually want shopping. And those areas are places that ultimately we want to be pedestrian and fun and cafe focused and lively. We want all of our commercial areas to be that. So I can't find a loser. There are some that are not doing so well as others today, but I want them all to succeed. My problem is we only have 7, 8 buildings that are more than 2 stories of commercial today? Like there's almost no choices, right? So where can they go? When we build more, buildings that have commercial on several floors, like the physio in Lynn Valley, physio's upstairs, McDonald's is downstairs, dentists are on the 3rd floor, I think. So they do go upstairs when there's options, but we need to build more of those options. And I think that for us is the rub, is how do we get from here to where we want to be? And some of that is OCP long-term, some of that is working with the OCP we have and the core commercial zone as sites come in to redevelop. But for my job in terms of the zoning and updating the existing general purpose commercial zones we have and applying them to places like Queensdale, places like Marine Drive, what zone do I use to replace that C9 or that C2, that C3 zone? Well, we're trying to think of a general commercial zone that has a similar set of uses and densities. So we're not down zoning any of those properties today.
I'm thinking about as granular as right in a town center, not be treated differently than the side streets around it.
And we may over time think about our town centers and want to actually expand where it's mixed use right now. Like right now, a lot of our town centers have a thin strip of mixed use and then immediately into residential. Over time, we may find that works better.
All right. I've got additional comments from Mr. Milburn, Ms. Lilova.
Yeah, the fine-grained current example, I think, was council's conversation they've been having with the Sealand Center, right? And so when they first came in, their proposal was 1 story of commercial. And we said, well, we want some of those uses that aren't up above. And so they said, well, we need more height. I said, okay, well, there was a negotiation there. But in the end, we have 2 stories of commercial plus some live work, right? And that was because we knew that by having that fine-grained look and seeing with redevelopment, we could achieve both objectives, right, on a site-by-site basis in the centers where we want.
But Dana, the building that just finished,
Restaurant.
it's got a corner, it's got a dentist right on the major corner right across the street from the park. And the building's only like a year and a half old. And it's a dentist with huge vaulted ceilings. I'm just like, oh my God. why are we letting this continuing to happen? That's our frustration. It just keeps happening. And I don't know if this is gonna solve it.
Ms. Lilova?
Through your worship, we keep talking about Salem because this is the first one out of the gate. So we're looking at this as a success and we're modeling those buildings, those sites, and looking at those sites coming in. They're kind of the first ones standing in there. There's more development coming in the area, and we will have more opportunity to have that conversation with the developers going forward.
But
But
that's not a
yeah.
success though, when you have a dentist in a new building that we've already watched on Marine Drive proliferate.
Counselor, I have a speaking list.
I know, but,
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
And
I'm excited now, Townsend. I am so excited.
Just one more, if there is a revisit of, I mean, I mentioned that this is the beginning of this work. We are going to look at every opportunity. I am thrilled that we have an opportunity to actually start implementing some of this and tabling it for discussion. But if we have opportunities to do local areas or anything like that, all of this conversation will be coming up based on the local area, if we're looking at local area plans and things like that. So it is an evolving conversation, and you'll hear a lot more about it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Pope?
Thank you. And thanks for your report and presentation. I have kind of a bunch of disparate thoughts, and one of them is Adjourned Village, where I'm pretty much there every day. And actually, I would frame it as it used to be a great place to go. But it's like I'm overwhelmed by complaints from people who have lived there forever with, you know, a number of changes in the village. And I don't know how to rectify these situations, but I do know that we have a parking lot now on at the main entrance to Edgemont. And they have a temporary use permit to keep it as a parking lot for, I don't know how long is left on that.
Let's clarify that one. Mr. Milburn?
They're applying for a temporary use permit.
They haven't gotten it.
They don't have one.
Okay, and.
It's not escaped our notice, though, that they look like they've engaged a professional parking
Yeah.
company in the process.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
And actually that raises another issue that I would really like to see when some kind of commercial space is being turned into a parking lot. I really want it to see become before council. I just don't want to see any more parking lots being put into lovely villages that have character.
It is not authorized as a commercial parking lot at this time at all.
So, yeah, the point's been made, they've spent a lot of money upgrading the parking lot there, so that's the intention. But I would like to see that kind of temporary use permit come before, and I think it should come before council. So we don't have that kind of situation again, because it also happened up the street at the old Chinese restaurant, where we now have a parking lot. And again, the temporary use permit was granted without council having any say in it. And neighbors it's just like, they're just appalled that that's happened in the neighborhood. And I don't know where the zoning comes into this, but if we're talking about the look and vibrancy and this and that of different zones, I don't see how we can leave out this issue of parking lots and
Parking
temporary use permits.
As a solo use is not permitted in the proposed zone.
Sorry?
So parking would be permitted as accessory to the building, but it wouldn't be permitted, like, you wouldn't be able to build just a parking lot or parking structure. That's not a principal use in the proposed zones. So,
Okay, well, that's good.
so one thing we are doing right now.
Yeah, but that is something that is, makes people a little irate. Also, the wind, to me, it isn't as much about the fact that it's daycares or dental offices, it's that the windows are blocked out, banks. It's that, and I think we have to be really vigilant about our bylaws that keep those window coverings up to, is it 4 feet or something like that? Which would make a difference. And do we have any say over whether vape stores, for example, go into ground level or above level? Like, I would like to see some of these things curated to ensure that we are having the kind of village atmosphere that we want in Edgemont and other places. I think we have to, because actually I think so much commercial is changing. The banks are changing. They are getting smaller. There is less foot traffic to banks. And daycares are changing as well. So, and the other thing that we've lost in Edgemont is a food market, a little produce food market. And so that's another concern. And that also reduces its neighborly vibrancy and appeal. I mean, it's going to be replaced by a liquor store, but we still need a food market. We still need a produce store there. And yeah, we see this over and over again in Lionsgate. I think the Marine Drive corridor is actually one of the best locations for some of these renderings that I'm seeing, including this one. I actually had thought we were now referring to it as a town center because we kind of, in the language I'm seeing in some of the other documents, it's Marine Drive, or it's Lionsgate-Marine corridor. So I do consider it a town center because it's connected to Lionsgate. And I do think that we need to be looking at this kind of zoning along that corridor that includes 6 stories and 2 stories of commercial. And I'm not sure how much relevance that is to this particular discussion, but I just kind of wanted to throw it out there.
That's fair. I have a question. Take advantage of this well-dressed group of people over here for a moment. I don't understand how these two solitudes can be true at the same time. Low vacancy, high demand, and not economically viable. When a commercial space is there, we can lease a pretty typical small format space for about $30-35 a square foot on the lease. When I make it into a residential strata condo, I get $4 to $4.50 a square foot on it. How on earth is it not commercially viable to have that space when you get such a higher return out of it being commercial?
And the answer to that question is?
There just aren't enough customers, or it's not actually in demand?
Your worship, this goes back to a comment I made before about while the rent on a per square foot basis is net leasable, it's typically higher for some commercial spaces. When you throw in all the other additional spaces, the engineering that goes into it, car suppression, everything like that, when you compare it to construction costs, often the commercial or employment component, particularly in mixed-use buildings, is usually far less lucrative for someone looking to develop the land than what the residential is at the end of the day. That is changing now, obviously, given that the strata, we're seeing a market shift away from strata towards more rental product, and it might balance out. But generally, in our experience in mixed-use buildings, unless otherwise required, employment-generating space tends to be subsidized by the residential component. And so therefore, most developers are reticent to include it unless otherwise required to do so. And also, when you try to ask for a minimum amount of it, it may limit the amount of overall development, even the amount of total housing that gets built. So it is a very difficult line to walk in terms of the policy making that balance.
That's just
So
unsustainable.
it's the overhead that they have to endure as a business rather than necessarily the limits of uses, demand in the marketplace. What role do we have in their overhead cost to create the space that we could make it so there's fewer barriers and this apparent latent demand would be met in the marketplace?
Yes, Your Worship. So the zone that Tamsin's highlighted here on screen is really designed as a bit of a pressure release valve to encourage that second or third floor of of office space, which is perfectly appropriate for a dentist. They can pay those lease rates because those are highly profitable businesses, without being overly restricted in that other commercial zone, which would, get in the way of business. That's not what we want to do. I understand that, and that's certainly why the recommendation is to continue to allow a vibrancy of uses outside of the town centers, but really to emphasize allowing this, providing this option in the town centers. You can get that additional floor space and start moving those less attractive businesses into those spaces with a restrictive approach only in this core commercial zone where unactive uses like the dentist's office are required to be on this floor.
It surprised you to hear that some of our commercial leasing agents have said that there's too much commercial space in the district of North Vancouver, and it's very hard for them to lease it out.
That would surprise me, as we've heard today, that there's very limited capacity in the marketplace right now.
I don't know whether that's just protecting the market from competition in it or some other thing, but I have heard that from several commercial agents that they're mostly focused on the flexibility and use in light industry, which is creating a competition between the classes. But they don't want us, they're not actually actively seeking us to get additional commercial that's not ground floor commercial, because they think it'll be very hard to lease.
Through your worship,
Mr. Milburn?
Just one really quick comment. I know you have some good comments. I would say we spend a disproportionate amount of time telling these commercial lenders, leasers, to stay out of light industrial.
Yeah.
They often look for the cheaper rents, and they want to put a lot of uses, and they're saying, why are you restricting me? And I say, well, we're trying to make our light industrial areas viable for light industrial uses. And so they do often try to apply pressure to try to encourage that. And what's really challenging too is a lot of those commercial uses, they have a parking demand way higher than the industrial areas can actually provide, because many of them are built to the full property line or have one or two spaces. So there's this constant interplay in the marketplace where folks are trying to pressure that. And in the industrial section, we'll talk about that a little bit more, about some things that we need to do in that area too. But I'll just say that, there's a lot of space that doesn't meet market demand. Like when you look at it, it's either the bad parking or all kinds of issues. And we would love to see more redevelopment to more match market demand. So some people have different opinions about what's in the marketplace based on their market segment. But I would say that we have high rents. I think the general principle is because we don't have enough. With enough industrial, we don't have enough of commercial.
My on-demand commercial realtor is saying office, yes, but no to retail. So not a lot available in retail, but yes to office.
So
yeah, if I can chime in, we are, just remember the context. I think business is in a tough spot right now in general, and we're in that bubble of time right now where retail in particular, the desirable uses, the cafes, the restaurants, they are the low margin businesses that are really struggling right now. So remember, policy is for the next 20, 30 years of redevelopment. And so just keep that in mind. And to your point, I think in North Van, my experience so far, there is a difference between commercial and light industrial agents. They know their markets, they know their pockets, and there is a great incentive to place commercial in light industrial right now. So some of these groups are that competitiveness, we don't want that competing commercial space because we can get the guys come in at $30 a square foot in our light industrial inventory or whatever it is. So I go back and I like how Adam put it. We need to grow the pie so that everybody can get a piece of the pie. I'd be careful around, if we have $60 a square foot, and I have heard $60 a square foot, I look at our property as all leased out. I'd be careful with just hearing from that one person saying, we have too much empty commercial space. Because business call me every day and ask me to go into that light industrial with their, studios and fitness and all those kind of uses.
We have to stop it.
let's try and get through the industrial section, and then I think that's where we'll break for the second night. If that's okay? Is that about what
But
you
it's
intended?
not tomorrow night.
No.
That would be 27 hours of this. I'm done.
There is some parallelism, so now that we've gone through the commercial, I think the concepts are similar, so let's try.
Please.
So turning to the industrial, we'll start with just a little bit on heavy industrial, and then we'll get into the light industrial, curating the use discussion, very similar to what we just had. So just on the heavy industrial, port industrial, this is just a kind of similar to the parks discussion earlier, just a kind of FYI. Not much is changing. We have a fairly successful EZLI zone that has worked well over the last 10, 15 years. Those uses and permissions will remain very similar. It's just being transported into the new format. The main change here is that we are reducing the potential for subdivision. So just to help continue to protect our very large port-oriented uses. So really that's the only key piece there. So turning to the light industrial, very similar to the discussion we've just had, it's that parallel discussion of how do we get more space built? And should we be curating the uses, restricting the uses so that it's really light industrial uses in light industrial areas? So again, that context, right now we have approximately 30% of the uses have some kind of commercial component. Now, some of those make a lot of sense. We, for many years, had things like flooring stores. You can buy your flooring, you can have it installed. Plumbing supply stores, you can buy your plumbing and have a plumber install it. Those kinds of things make sense to fit in an industrial area. Where we're seeing, though, the growth, and this is the thing that's kind of worrying us and causing this discussion, is really around the fitness, the dance studios, the martial arts, those kinds of uses. Childcare is a use that we're going to talk about separately, but interestingly, there's only a couple of childcares. So while they're a visible concern, like we've obviously got lots of childcares throughout the district, but in terms of light industrial zoning, there's only a couple. So it is something we want to fix, but it's not the problem. It's just part of the problem. But again, just as the conversation we've just had, is where do these uses go? So if you think about those fitness studios, we don't have a lot of only commercial buildings. And when things like weight rooms have gone into mixed-use buildings, that dropping of the large weight that happens, I'm not a bodybuilder in case you hadn't noticed, but I understand it happens. And it can be really problematic for the residents above. So we need to think very carefully about where can these uses go? Because we have a community that seems to love them. And that desire for the personal trainer and the CrossFit studio and the training for my kids, it's all growing. So some of those uses, like the yoga studio, easily fits in the mixed use building, but some of them less. So limited options, again, it's about growing that pie and finding the right place for these different uses. Kind of talked about who they are, but here's a picture just kind of talking us through. Acting classes, technically that's a trade school. But when we first included trade schools in our light industrial zones, I think we were thinking something a little bit different. So that one makes me smile every time I see it. So in the Pemberton area, now somebody mentioned Bridge earlier. Interestingly, because they're a manufacturer of beer, they are a use that's permitted there, but it's a use that we could also update our commercial zones to permit. So going forward, uses that are vibrant and attract customers actually go to the right place. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is create more possibility for the businesses that would actually love to be in the commercial areas to have the option to be in the commercial areas.
Brewing beer is hard in a mixed use too.
Yeah.
Smell.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that?
And the height too,
Yeah, height.
It has
Yes.
been done. It's been done successfully downtown Vancouver. There were a couple, yeah.
But it's also.
Find a way.
So again, it's that recognizing that if we start to restrict the uses, there are impacts. But here, there is one difference. And I think the key difference here is when we were restricting the uses in commercial, there are a variety of commercial areas businesses can go to. It's not that big a difference. But here, if we're taking out some of the uses that are permitted in commercial areas, they might have somewhere else to go. In the long term, that's true, but right now, with our limited supply, it's not so true. So though the zoning might permit these uses elsewhere, there aren't many places they could relocate to. So yeah, this is just talking about the vacancy rate. I think we've kind of covered this, so we'll keep going. So the light industrial zone, and again, this is, this is why we're here, is to get your feedback, because we could go either way. We could start to pull back and restrict uses, or we could keep the uses we've got for now and look at where we can build supply. So this is the kind of key question. Keep the uses we've got, be permissive, with the exception of childcare. So childcare, I said there would be a slide on it, and very much so. Our existing bylaw, for very good reason, about 25 years ago, I think it was, we brought in an amendment to the bylaw that said childcare could be permitted everywhere because we had such a shortage. And in general, that works. If we have lots of childcare in residential areas as a result, we can build it in some of our institutional areas. But for light industrial, it's become a real friction point. People think they can locate there, but then when they actually go through the logistics of it, and find out they need an outdoor space for the kids, which would require using the parking lot, of which they have no extra parking because there's a parking shortage, right away they're in a conflict. And invariably it becomes this point of contention for people who think they might be able to go there and then get disappointed. So even though there's not a huge demand for these industrial sites, or not a lot have gone in, we do recommend pulling back. But we would still permit it as an accessory use. And this is really just for the one or two businesses that are large enough to potentially want on-site childcare. So the other piece we wanted to talk about is the what else? What could we do going forward? So in areas like Maplewood, we have existing business parks. Now those are CD zoned today, but ultimately they could become a business park zone so we have consistency across them. What's interesting with the business parks is that we see more intensive scale of development, where instead of just 1 or 1.5 story buildings, you actually see modern buildings, some of them 2, 3, even 4 stories in height. And in some areas they go up to, not in the district, but in other parts of the Lower Mainland, you see them even taller. So this is something that traditionally, business parks have a larger commercial component and are suitable for potentially those fitness studios, the workout places, what's it called?
Combat sports.
Laser.
Yes, laser tag. See, you knew my finger was doing. Yeah, so those kinds of things start to fit in there while still having a mix of uses. And then thinking even longer term, and this is what Neo was alluding to as we go forward, and we think about the evolution of the economic development strategy and future local planning work and OCP work, is there may be sites, and we have to be very careful with this, and this would require study and thought, but there may be sites that are currently either commercial sites or potentially just a few of our light industrial sites that might be closer to transit, or very large sites that are suitable for redevelopment, where we might want to consider a very intense form of development. And in the South Main area of Vancouver, you've started to see some of these multi-story buildings go in. Now, I will say that even though some of them have loading bays at grade, they are primarily commercial. So I'm not saying that these would be a light industrial use, but they do start to expand our supply of options and provide more space for jobs. And I think that is kind of the key piece of the economic development strategy is how do we expand that?
Is that office?
From what I can tell, walking around the neighborhood, there's a whole range, and Adam can probably speak to this more, but some of it is research and development. So,
It's like Great Northern Way area? kind of?
no, it's, you know where Main Street and, you know where, the new Mount Equipment
Yes,
Co-op is?
oh, yeah.
In that
Olympic
neighborhood
Village.
between there up
Yeah,
to
the
Broadway.
This is
Mount
six,
Pleasant
yeah.
industrial area.
Yeah,
Is that it? Your additional comments over
You
here?
know, I
Paul?
can speak to this, like, working on the rezonings in the Mount Pleasant industrial area, and the requirement there is to reach that kind of height with office, they have to have 1/3 of the space as industrial. So it's forcing more industrial in exchange for some office space.
Trade-off.
It's like that's on 6th Ave, just between Maine and Quebec.
so just up the hill from Olympic Village, that helps.
So do we have parcels in the district that might work?
Adam.
Subject
To your
to,
worship of the council, this is a challenging one too, because intensification of industrial is very nuanced and very cost sensitive. And often when we're talking about the industrial component, even trying, I worked with Vancouver on their employment line economy back in the day that led to some of these policies. And it worked in Mount Pleasant because it's the perfect microcosm of office above, they had an office shortage, they could make it work. But they had a lot of big sites left over. That's the big thing. We often need still a very large parcel. There are some large industrial areas around Maplewood right now, I'd say that's still, when we're looking at developing the ADS that might have that. But I would note that when you're talking about consolidation of smaller sites, so talking about maybe the Pemberton area and Lynn Creek industrial areas, those would require a lot of consolidation, which is economically very challenging. There's a lot of additional question marks that rise with those sets of projects that make it challenging to get above grade at that level.
And the current economics is, there's quite a vacancy, at least in Vancouver, I believe, of office space.
There is now, yes.
Huge.
just to be clear, there's a lot of downtown vacancy.
Okay,
I
true.
think Mount Pleasant has actually been quite successful with those kind of few stories of large floor plate, sort of contiguous office space like the WeWork spaces and things like that. But that is also a direct, when you were saying, earlier, Vancouver has built a whole lot of commercial in the last office, especially downtown in the last 10 years, waking up to the fact that they did not add a square foot of commercial for a very long time. So because of that, they're probably thinking 6 million square feet only needed. I'm recalling, but very few sites for this particular implementation. There's probably a couple of sites in the district, in some of our existing close to population, close to rapid transit areas that we could tackle, but that would really require study. As you mentioned, it's not an easy, okay, let's do this here.
I may be behind on the speakers list, but I had Councillor Murray, Councillor Ma, and Councillor Pope. Councillor Murray, did you speak?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I just don't think there's a market for office. I think we need to engage with, I think we should engage with commercial realtors to understand what's going on. And I think what you guys are saying is great. I just don't think there's a market for office on the North Shore. We don't have a bridge. We have to deal with transportation, right? And the land costs are massive. I think what we need to focus on is retaining businesses that are being threatened to be pushed off the North Shore. And that is those contractors and those commercial businesses that have built businesses here for decades and work for us and work for this community. And if they go to South Surrey, that is going to be a big mistake. And we've got a lot of businesses like that. And we need to focus on that. We can't be everything to everyone. We can't accommodate every fitness facility that wants to stay on the North Shore and open up and create a business. We've got lots of them, and they are in our commercial areas and light industrial areas. And I think for the most part, it works, but we have to be careful. You know, Esplanade was, you know, the tire shop and the mechanic shop, and now they're all disappearing because it's all breweries. You know, we focus so much on housing and we don't focus on the other part of the tool, which is the sustainability of keeping the dirty businesses here, so we don't have to get in our cars and drive to South Burnaby or South Surrey to get them fixed. You know, so I think we have to understand who we are. Have we sat down with the city in West Van? Talked about what they're doing? Talked about what their retail, like, most people that live anywhere on the North Shore, we don't see the boundaries. We, you know, I shop at Park Royal, I shop at the city, you know. So have we talked to our counterparts about their plans? The city's building a huge commercial and residential at Capilano Mall. Do we talk to them?
We do. Through your
Okay.
worship, we talk on a regular
We need to
basis.
understand, I think councils need to understand sort of, because as the decision makers, we need to understand, you know, what that future is for them, so we can make good decisions, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We don't have to have all the same. It's okay to move around within an area. So I'd be interested in that going forward for further discussion and you know, just on that bank thing, Northwoods is one of our, you know, I think a really successful little development that we did with rental and a great little grocery store that was, you know, stongs and all sorts of mixed use in there. It was awesome. And they plunked a bank, my bank, right in the middle of the parking lot. And I was like, yes, I don't have to go to Lonsdale and drive around the block 22 times. And then it lasted a year and they pulled it out. And now it's an empty, huge building with 4 offices and 3 people and a very dirty PTV screen where I can see the fingerprints when I walk in the door, and I always ask for the rag. And it's just a waste of space, a complete and utter waste of space. And people don't go to banks anymore. Seniors, but the vast majority of people are doing, that's how they bank on this. And they knew, I don't even know, their market analysis said that they should go in there, and they were wrong. And now it's just sitting there, and it's a huge waste of space, and I think it should be something else, but we've probably locked in that use as well.
Where's the logo?
Yeah, through your worship, I think you bring up a great point, which is once you start picking the winners,
Yeah.
where does it stop? And at what point in time do you pick the winners and pick the losers and so on? And I think you brought up a great point around Esplanade. All the breweries, actually the brewery business is not doing great. So breweries are consolidating, breweries are shutting down, and that was how long? 5 years, 10 years, maybe 10-year trend, and it's already turning. So there's a big
People
risk.
don't drink.
They're correct. There is a big.
But alcohol, the consumption of alcohol is
I
declining
know.
significantly. Young people
One
don't
drink,
drink.
not 5 drinks.
Yeah.
Like Mike's generation.
Yeah, my
Not mine.
point is so.
Out of order, out of order. I don't know what Mike drinks, I don't know what you're talking about.
He does, or did, or does.
All right.
The moral of the story is that picking winners is a loser game. It's a loser
Yeah,
game.
so let's not do
It is hard to fine tune, and you mentioned it, regulation does not move as fast as the market. And that is why we have to be very strategic and very careful about where we start tweaking those levers, because it backfires pretty quickly.
I'll just say this to you though. When I was elected in 1996, Erwin Torrey was the director of planning, or maybe 97 or 98, it was Plunkett, I think Samson remembers Richard Plunkett. And one of the first reports he brought forward was to our council and saying there was a bunch of uses down Lower Pemberton, down off Forest. And he said, do you want to have dog kennels and gun shops and tobacco shops down here? And we were like, nope. And he goes, okay, we're gonna amend the uses in the zoning and we're gonna take those out because we don't think you want to do that. And do you know that's never happened since? Except when we did the mausoleum with PRO. We took out mausoleums because we didn't want a 12-story building in the ground. But we don't do it like we used to. And we used to look at the zones and we did used to tweak them and we did used to move them around and we did used to say, this is not current anymore. Why are we allowing that? And we continually watch the city, you know, as the evolution of Lower Lonsdale, has been implemented, and the first thing they did was put a grocery store in, smart, smart, smart. And the next thing they did was create minimums and maximums of those unit sizes to create that shopping diversity and that attractiveness and diversity. And it's been such a success. Those businesses have been there for a long time, little dress shops that you think, they're happening. And I don't know why we are not following suit and watching our neighbors and what they're doing and taking some risk and making some of those decisions. I don't want to come down harsh on these businesses and say, get out, but we've got to make some decisions going forward, and they're going to be hard ones. And I think it's for the sustainability of this community. And lease prices, new buildings are expensive. We got to protect those old commercial buildings as well, and those areas that are older, because they're affordable and business can operate.
Yeah, I just wanted to we did talk to C&D planners on the Lower Lonsdale in terms of their commercial zones, commercial mixed-use zones. I think with the exception of one CD zone, there is no minimum, maximum unit sizes. I think that is kind of what we see the vibrancy as a result of, like, zoning is one tool, right? As a result of several factors. I think that they have a historic, like those heritage stock, and that, have this sort of already small size.
Maybe they don't have them now, but when they built them, they did, because I asked Larry Orr about that and Richard White. And they confirmed that they did have minimums and maximums. And I brought that to Brian Bylaw when he was the director. So maybe when they zoned the buildings originally, and maybe they don't have those anymore, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe historically there might be, but I think, we can, I just wanted to say that the factor that, they have a smaller CRU sizes, they have certain uses going into those areas, they have the slope. And so that it doesn't really build into this contiguous ground floor planes, right? So you have smaller ones and you go follow the slope. So I think all those factors come into play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but like the Salvation Army is huge, and it's on the slope, it's just below third. And it's been there forever. So I would be interested in how they got those units within those zonings to be so small.
Yeah, we can definitely have another conversation with them and digging into the history of it. I think I wanted to point out that the vibrancy of the street has a lot to do with how the street and then the ground floor is designed, which I think through this zoning rewrite, we are going to improve, the setback, the minimum and maximum setback, and then the design of those ground floor uses, and then increasing the ceiling, the floor to ceiling height, all those will help. And so it's not just, the restricting the use and then the size itself.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Mon, Pope. Councillor Mon, go ahead, please.
Just a comment about protecting light industrial land. As Councilor Murray said, we don't want to be driving to another municipality like over the Port Van Bridge because we have to go get our car fixed. We need to preserve the industry, preserve the land, those kind of industries. It can't be just about housing. We need a balanced approach. Having said that, I know we talk about intensification, and usually that means going up. But we also need ground level access for businesses that we have in the North Shore that need to park their work trucks after. Because right now, if you go down to the Maplewood area, some of those trucks are parked in the streets. And I worry about as we have
It's
our,
gonna be a disaster.
when we have our housing developments there,
Disaster.
there's some major projects coming. Some of them don't have a lot of parking requirements. Well, where are they gonna park? They're gonna park in the street, and there's gonna be competing with our businesses. So I know you know this, because there's all these competing needs, but it's also, we're gonna have to make some decision to say, we want this business to stay. And I know we can't pick winners and losers, so maybe that category, we want these type of businesses to stay. And we may not be able to deliver as many housing units as someone wants us to. So those are gonna be some tough decisions that we're gonna have to make. Thank you.
That was exciting, it was. I'm saying it was.
Okay. I'll say something a little inflammatory.
Oh, just the way to end it off.
No, so something that our council has ended up in 4-3 splits on several occasions now is the question of uses and the transferability of uses. So Physio wanted to be in that spot, and we felt compassion for the business that that the zoning and use didn't quite fit, and we wanted to make it fit. Then there was a travel agent, and then there was a another recent one. They were all.
The accountant.
So, why are lawyers left out when accountants are welcomed in these
Oh, that
office
was, yeah,
spaces?
Crown.
Down on First
Crown.
Avenue.
It's been a very divisive issue on the council, but I do think we need to dig into the economic, the importance of having clearly defined uses between the classes and why it matters in the valuation of the property. And when we muddy the water, sometimes intentionally because we just want to find a solution to that particular problem, it has a ripple effect in the industry that is a big challenge. So we need to come up with a definition, get it right, and not change it for a while, so that the market can take place. Businesses can succeed and fail, and different things can come into the space, and eventually you're going to get something that has a sort of natural carrying capacity within the environment. But if council's constantly willing to change those definitions, then it becomes a big challenge. So I'd love to have that kind of discussion along the way as well, and I think it's relevant to the question on the page.
Is that your
Maybe
definition of
on that
inflammatory?
That was me just
Wow.
all guns.
Scary.
We got through a lot tonight, so thank you so much for all of your input.
It was
really
good.
does help us move this project along. We'll be coming back on the 23rd, talking about parking. Thank you, John, for coming out tonight, and Eva will be back then.
John, we're gonna have lots of questions for you. Don't you worry.
So,
Okay, let's
but
keep
what I
going.
would ask is that if there are other pieces of work you'd also like us to dig deeper into and bring to you, please let us know so we can have that ready for you on the 23rd as well.
Move
Otherwise,
to.
thank you so much.
Am I adjourning or am I
You're-
carrying this forward? Because we've advertised the other one, we're adjourning. Accepted, thank you very much. Everyone get in the house. Have a great evening.